Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for HR in a half an hour. My name is Kely Blackburn, HR Business Advisor here with Morris & Garitano, and today I'm here to discuss ways to effectively manage leave of absences and what your compliance obligations are when administering this process. We've reserved time to answer your questions during our Q&A session and at the end of that presentation. So, however, if you have a burning question during this presentation, feel free to drop it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address those during that time. And as a courtesy, please mute your sound until we reach the Q&A portion of our presentation to ensure that all attendees can listen in on the important details I plan to share with you today. But first, before we get started and getting into the particulars, I want to take a moment to thank you for your participation in our registration survey to gauge your knowledge base in this process. As you can see, most of us are in the same boat, with more than half of you in that somewhat comfortable category with this process. While not far behind, another third of us have I have no idea what I'm doing, where do I start? I commend you on your honesty. These results identify areas of improvement, which I see as opportunities for us to work collaboratively to reduce your HR liabilities, which is why we are all present and accounted for this morning to get you where you need to be. So with any process, we need to remember our why, and I assume you all chose to join this conversation today because of something, right? Well, my purpose today is to increase your understanding of the leave of absence process and how to align your company policies and practices to reduce your business risk. Now, it can be hard to tackle or even understand what types of leave of absence are available to an employee and what the legal requirements are at play. So I've sectioned out our material into several relatable topics to tackle your next of leave of absence request, including determining the law of the land, which law for which reason, and what employee entitlements come with those, how pay and benefits interact with one another, how to properly document and track your leave of absence, how to restore employment with compliance in mind, and highlighting best practices and common missteps with this process. I will then close with a live Q&A session, giving you the opportunity to participate in the conversation to get answers to your burning questions. So let's get started. Managing leave of absences in California is challenging for HR professionals due to the state's multiple leave laws and their interaction with federal laws and company policies. California employers must consider both state and federal laws, such as the California Family Rights Act, known as CFRA, California Pregnancy Disability Leave, PDL, and the Family Medical Leave Act, or known as FMLA. So please keep in mind that when we specify headcounts on this slide, the law includes full-time, part-time, commission employees, and employees on paid or unpaid leave of absence, which are expected to return to full duty. One other key feature to this regulation I would like to point out is that if you are an employer who has 50 or more employees, you will remain covered under FMLA, even when your employee count falls below 50, until you reach a future point where you no longer have 50 employees employed for consecutive 20 work weeks in the current and preceding year. Now, with each regulation offers different entitlements, and for the employee, and for time's sake, we're going to narrow on the most utilized leave of absence laws, FMLA and CFRA. So administering a leave of absence, we're referring to a serious health condition resulting from an illness, injury, impairment, physical or mental condition that requires inpatient care like a hospitalization or continued treatment under the care of a medical provider. Protective leave of absences do not cover short-term illnesses that last only a few days, like the common cold, earaches, upset stomach, flu, all do not qualify. The other part is who is the serious condition affecting, which can include your own employee's medical condition, one that affects their eligible family member of the employee, to include a condition stemming from military service or bonding with a new member of the family. Now remember, CFRA and FMLA differ in many ways, and California employers must know the requirements for each. In some cases, CFRA is more generous, and in others, FMLA is more generous. Keep in mind that California Code Regulation 7297.10 provides that employers must determine which statute is more generous and proceed with that most generous route. So now we understand some laws. Now we need to determine if an employee is eligible. Luckily, CFRA and FMLA have fairly similar requirements to include if the employee has worked with you for a minimum 1 year and has worked at least 1,250 hours within that last year. Now remember, FMLA has one distinction, Radius requirements. For someone to be FMLA eligible, they have to work in a facility with at least 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. The other entitlement is how long. Well, FMLA and CFRA both offer up to 12 weeks of leave, which can be taken all at once or intermittently through a calendar year. Now, while pregnancy disability leave offers the state entitlement, in most cases, if an employee is CFRA and FMLA eligible, they have the ability to extend that leave for an additional up to 12 weeks for baby bonding time, which is why in some leaves, employees can be out for upwards to 24 weeks with a combined of PDL and CFRA and FMLA time. Now remember, this allotment and entitlement of 12 weeks is based on full-time employee work schedule. Therefore, if an employee works less, prorate that amount to the time that's equal to their normal working schedule. So now we've understand the laws, we know the entitlements. Now we need time to tackle how pay and benefits are going to work. Now, there's two aspects to pay and benefits. The first is coordination of health benefits. If an employee has medical benefits and is placed on a protected leave by law, the employer is required to protect all applicable medical benefits during their leave, up to 12 weeks, including covering the employer's portion of premium if that's part of your package. Now here's where I see most common missteps. If an employee is responsible for their portion of premium, the employer must prearrange with the employee on how they're going to cover their premium costs with one of the following options before their leave begins. You can utilize the employee's PTO or sick hours to cover their premium costs until those hours exhaust. Now, if they exhaust, then we can defer to the remaining two options to include setting up direct payments on a biweekly or monthly schedule, either to the business or the insurance carrier, or you can also arrange a wage repayment plan. Not one of my favorites, but it's possible, which allows the employer to arrange a repayment plan and legally deduct the amount that the employer authorized and covered during that leave of absence. Now, the other part of this is there's integration of benefits. When we say integration of benefits, what we mean is that the employee can file for state-funded benefits, which pay up to about 66% of the employee's salary, leaving a gap of wages. To offset that lack of finances, employees have the option to integrate their company benefits with those state-funded replacement options, allowing them to collect their full salary. So PTO and sick hours, accompanied by the state-funded insurances, amounts to their full weekly salary. Now, this is completely voluntary. Now, should an employee elect to do this, you must work collaboratively to calculate how much PTO and sick to apply on a weekly basis to bridge that gap. Keep in mind, the goal is to keep the employee whole. Should they collect more than their full salary, the employee may be liable for overpayment of state benefits. So now we need a plan on which documents to use to facilitate your process. And there's a couple that we're going to go over today. So in HR, a constant term we use is document, document, document. For purposes of leave of absence the purpose behind absence forms is to ensure your compliance and prove your due diligent efforts during this process. So when an employee comes to you and presents you with a doctor's note or verbally requests a leave, supply them with a company leave of absence form. Along with this form, you must also supply them with the applicable federal or state insurance benefit notices, like state disability, pregnancy insurance, and paid family leave. All enclose the necessary directions to file for state-funded wage replacement benefits. And don't forget about your leave of absence company policy to ensure no surprises unfold during your process. And then to finalize your documentation, you must also complete what's known as a leave designation form, which acts as a formal record to the employee to signify that of their inactive employment status, duration of their leave and expected return date, as well as a coordination of benefits. But one other thing that I often hear that is overlooked, do not forget about letters. Letters are a great way to continue formal communication with the employee. Examples of these formats can include a leave exhaustion letter that can formally notify the employee of their anticipated return to work date, outline steps to their return to work, and may include directions for a work accommodation process, a notice of termination of benefits in the instance of an employee non-payment situation for their medical, and a notice of failure of return. or as I like to call, ghosting an employee. They were supposed to be back 6 months ago. We have no idea where they were. So I hope a few of those documents are great. So the last link in the chain is coordinating an employee's reinstatement to work and how the interactive process, or AKA the work accommodation, may impact these steps. So when you remember that part of your documentation, it's best practice to supply the employee with your return to work company policy, which outlines both employer and employee's responsibilities during this process, helping you to create a seamless return to work procedure. Knowing what to expect is always best practice and can eliminate any unnecessary confusion or stress when an employee plans to return to work. So the first step with this is restoring contact with the employee to better prepare them to return to work. And oftentimes I recommend that companies think through this process on how they want to re-engage. And again, there's that leave of absence exhaustion letter that might do the talking for you. Now, you want to notify the employee of their requirements for return to work, and there's two ways you can go about this. For a personal non-medical leave, the employee should have provided you with an anticipated return to work date, which would have been asked on the request form you submitted, and coordinate their return to work according to your company policy. Now, for medical, this is where things can get a little tricky. Prior to the employee's expected return to work, you need to secure a work release, a doctor's note, from the employee's medical provider, which may dictate two different outcomes. They'll either be released to full duty with no restrictions, or it may list temporary or permanent work restrictions, limiting the employee's ability to perform their essential job duties. If restrictions are noticed, this triggers the work accommodation process. And lastly, remember to follow all of your company policies consistently and inform all management or supervisor of the employee's expected return date to, again, avoid those great surprises. Now, here's where the process can present some challenges for employers. If an employee presents you with a doctor's note limiting their ability to perform their duties or outlines scheduling restrictions, this triggers a work accommodation. What does that mean? How do I do this? Well, there's a couple different steps you can accomplish this. To document the process, you need to supply the employee with a reasonable accommodation form and ask for a copy of the doctor's note if they didn't supply you one, and a copy of your company policy. Remember, avoid those surprises. Once you've collected both the request form and the doctor's note, which should highlight the specific work limitations, which we're going to help drive your conversation during your interactive process meeting, which you need to schedule once all the documentation is in hand. The goal of this formal sit down with the employee is to collectively discuss how the restrictions and the restrictions limit the employee's ability to perform their duties on their job description. This productive dialogue should accomplish two things. One, provide you with the information necessary to make a workplace adjustment consistent with your commitment for equal opportunity, and demonstrate your engaged, good faith effort to resolve any workplace challenge to the individual. The goal and outcome is to either determine whether restructuring a job would be possible, accommodation, or cause an undue hardship. You can't reasonably accommodate. Now what do we do? Now, if and when an accommodation is put into place, any check-ins, accommodation adjustments, changes in limitation should be documented by the employer to ensure you record your company's due diligence and good faith efforts in this process. So to round out the conversation, I want to highlight some best practices and common missteps that occur that I hear oftentimes with employers when they're administering a leave of absence. The first and probably most important with any process is that people are involved, and knowing your role is key. The major process checkpoints in a leave of absence include documentation, benefits, and a return to work. Both the employer and the employee must actively participate in this process to ensure that the best outcome for all parties involved. Employers need to supply the employee with the required forms and notices, coordinate their benefits, communicate how company benefits can integrate with the state insurance funds, as well as bringing about a seamless return to work process that may include a work accommodation. But on the flip side, it's not all on the employer to do the work. The employee must also do their part and participate when necessary to ensure that everyone is apprised of the details. Remember, surprises can be enjoyed during a happy birthday, but not when it's something in your HR process. It can be a disaster in the making. Next, I would like to point out some common missteps that occur in this process with employers. Be timely in your response to requests for a leave of absence and be prepared. One of my favorite is to organize your process. Build a binder with all the necessary forms and notices required in your LOA process, which creates that one-stop shop for everything leave of absence. Documentation is huge. Too many employers handle all communication verbally or by text. I always advise a follow-up to every conversation with either a formal letter, like the ones I supplied to you earlier, or just a simple email, briefly summarizing what was discussed. This makes it a lot harder for employees to object or deny what they were verbally told. Well, as we discussed in the email and in our conversation, your expected return date was X date, etc. Setting expectations. What is your role and what is the employee's role in a leave of absence? And educate them on your policy expectations to lower your risk of missteps before, during, and after a leave of absence. Communication. I can't tell you how often we just stop communicating when somebody's out of the building. You need to follow up. Far often do I hear, Becky said she was going to be to work next week. That was 6 months ago. We haven't heard from her. What do we do? Well, the last thing you want is to be ghosted by an employee because we forgot about them or didn't communicate enough. You want to over communicate in this process, not under. Lack of policy depth. Handling LOA issues on a case-by-case basis can be quite tricky and can bring up and open you for a variety of different issues. You need to review your policy to ensure that it is aligned with the compliance aspects of the regulations, but also to be managed consistently. It's those inconsistencies that are to come back to haunt you. And managing performance. Avoid treating employees differently based on like or need, or being afraid of actually being the administrator of the process and taking control of the situation. Remember, do not let the employee administer it. It's your responsibility to do so. And employers often think that they can't enforce other basic employment policies like tardiness in an accommodation situation. So let's say just because Becky is pregnant and can't lift 20 pounds doesn't mean she can actually show up late unless she's got scheduling limitations listed on her work accommodation. And finally, commingling performance issues with leaves. Far too often do I hear that employers will often administer leaves differently for their problem children. Avoid, avoid, avoid. You have to keep those situations separate from one another and manage each process consistently with others. And lastly, that interaction of leaves and accommodations. Accommodations may actually occur before a leave of absence or may happen during a leave of absence because, again, if the person presents you with a lot of limitations that you're unable to accommodate, ding, 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 a leave of absence is an accommodation. And you want to know how those processes interplay with one another. So that's it, guys. Half an hour, we've got exactly 10 minutes. Now it's your turn. First off, I would love to hear from you. Open up your chat, and I'd like to get to know what your burning questions are. But I'd like to start the conversation with, did any of the common missteps sound familiar? And if so, which one? So go ahead, drop your questions and drop your responses. I would love to be able to see what they are. So we've got 10 minutes, so please ask away.
Kelly, we have a couple of questions in our Q&A feature here. I can read them out too if you want to address them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so the first one we have, it says, if an employee is using baby bonding leave and they choose to work part-time versus full-time, do we need to keep their vacation accrual at full accrual, or can it be changed to a reduced accrual? A little background, their regular part-time employees do not receive vacation benefits at their company.
That's a really good question. It might have some legality to it. So when it comes to them adjusting their schedule, especially for baby bonding time, again, you want to track that. That would be done on an intermittent basis. So you would need to come up with some kind of attendance tracking to monitor their hours. Now, if they're not working, their full hours and it's against company policy, I could see some room to prorate their accruals during that time since they don't meet the qualifications. That would be the best route, I would say, in order to legally make that change within your company policy. So again, there's two parts to that. So if the person comes back for baby bonding and wants to take it intermittently, they have the right to do that. So you need to develop a process and a process to track that and actually keep them apprised of how much time they've taken and how much time they have left. And then also, if it does affect their benefit eligibility for vacation, prorate it accordingly during that time. Because again, the big part of here is you want to protect their benefits during a protected leave. Baby bonding is a protected leave. So you're prorating it by protecting that benefit, not eliminating it completely to make sure that you're compliant with the law. Hopefully that answers your question, Jenna. Great question.
All right, looks like the next one. Can you please share how to calculate FMLA or PDL eligibility for part-time employees?
So again, it's a proration. So again, it's based on the up to 12 weeks is based on up to 12 weeks, right? So really you have to articulate it in a way that makes the person whole. There are some calculations that I can provide to that individual on the side that can kind of help because there are different calculations for different reasons and it would have to be done on an individual basis. But basically the point is you're prorating it to match what is going on in their normal working schedule. So I'm happy to share that with that individual offline. And if anybody else is curious about those calculations, I'm happy to share those with you as well.
Great, thank you. So that that question was anonymous. So if you put that question into your chat, will you please go ahead and just shoot a private chat to the host and panelists, and we'll make sure that Kely is able to address your specific question.
Great questions, guys.
All right, next one. When we need quick follow-up to answer questions when questions come up, oh, this is more of a comment. When we need a quick follow-up to answer questions when questions do come up, Kely, our contact is with M&G. We have local legal counsel, but sometimes the insurance company is easier to ask that quick question. So
yeah, absolutely. So as long as we're not getting around like any kind of discrimination suits or, like a hot employee and there's a lot going on there that can confound those problems, I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And that's what I'm here for. That was kind of the purpose of this webinar, was to kind of let you guys know what the ins and outs of the process is. And if you have quick questions that just need answering, pick up the phone and give me a call. I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. Plus it's cheaper too.
All right. Okay, let's see, another question here. So one misstep that this particular person has taken, we have an employee on workers' comp, but we have failed to provide them with our standard FMLA or CFRA packets during this time to start the clock. Can we retroactively apply this leave?
No, you want to stay away from retroacting it because the problem with that is that you missed the boat on that. So you cannot affect the employee's actual eligibility because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Therefore, I would never recommend to prorate anything back. I'd say if you're a week behind, not so much of a problem. But if you're a few weeks or a couple months behind, absolutely not. You're going to have to start the clock when you sent those forms out to start the actual legal clock of those 12 weeks. So great question, which is one I actually get asked a lot.
All right. Last one we have in our queue here. Do you have a list of forms that we would need to collect based on the leave, i.e. baby bonding? Do you have examples available?
Absolutely. So I have examples of all the templates and forms that I showed up on the screen earlier in the documentation file. So I'm happy to address and send out any of those sample forms. And that might be something that we might include in our follow-up when we release this recording and the presentation slide deck to everybody. So that's something that I'm working on, some more details, but I do have those individual templates with letters, the forms, the designation forms, all the legal documentation you're going to need for either a baby bonding PDL or a CFR leave. Happy to do that. So just get back to me if you have specific questions, but otherwise just call and ask and I will give them out to everybody.
All right, some other one popped in here. Is this only when you cannot accommodate their job modification?
Yes, so that's a really great question. So, what I think often employers forget is the fact that a leave of absence is an accommodation. So, if you have somebody that's coming to you with a laundry list of limitations, or you don't have other positions available within the company that you can plug that person in that fits those limitations, then yes, you can send them out on a leave of absence as an accommodation. And then you would want to secure a doctor's note that's going to identify how long that leave of absence is going to be. Again, there's two different types. There's temporary accommodations and there's permanent accommodations. And your point is you need to identify which is which. So yes, leave of absences are an accommodation. So don't forget about that. So if you get into a situation where somebody is not CFRA or FMLA or PDL, if they're not eligible for those protections, you want to drive those requests through a work accommodation process because one, it's going to prompt you to document, two, you're following a formal compliant process, and three, you're doing everything to the book. So there's no rhyme or reason or inconsistencies in your process because anything medical is protected under ADA or California's version of that, which is the equal opportunity and housing authority. So you want to make sure that you're aware of those. And if you get any of those situations again, pick up the phone, let's call, and let's have a conversation, and I can help you through it.
All right, one other question in the chat here. They would love to get details on prorating part-time leaves.
Yes, so I'm happy to do that. I will get those resources together after this webinar session today. And for those that are interested, just drop me an email. For those of you that don't have my email, I can definitely drop that in the chat, as well as our main HR consulting box as well for those resources. And I'll go ahead and do that right now. Or Sarah, if you wouldn't mind doing that for me, that would be great.
I can do that.
Perfect.
And I do see a couple chats coming through asking for the forms and templates that Kely mentioned. All of those resources will be included in our follow-up email that we'll be sending in the coming days, along with a recording of this webinar and the slide deck, so you guys can read through it in your own time.
So I want to be able to keep this interactive if there's not any other like burning questions. I'm curious, if we got any feedback about what common missteps sounded familiar. If anything like that jived with our audience, that would be very interesting to know. And if you see one of those that looks familiar to you, let's talk it through and let's try to firm up your policy or get you where you need to be. And also to keep this interactive, I think I would love to take a poll. So we do have one where what document in your process is often overlooked or underutilized? And if you want to just go ahead and select the choice, you're welcome to. And we can kind of see which ones that maybe we have the most issues with. So we'll give you about 10, 15 seconds to go ahead and answer that for us. Where's the Jeopardy music when you need it? Ah, okay. The designation form I'm actually not that surprised about. That's very interesting, but not surprising. Again, the request form is one of those things are state and federal notice. So everything but the designation form was tied. So I'm actually really happy to see that we're utilizing those letter templates. Those are amazing pieces of material that I think some people often overlook, and I'm happy to hear that we're using those. That designation form though, so definitely if you want more direction on what that is, I'm happy to articulate that. So for time's sake, I'm going to ask for one more little poll, but we want to know feedback from you. What should we focus next in our next H&R in a half an hour webinar series, or what you'd like to learn more of? There's a couple different options, including performance management, employee engagement, work accommodations, labor law updates, or any others. We'd love to hear from you because, again, this is a resource for you all to ensure your compliance and to ensure that you are confident in those one-off HR action items. And I think we'll take a couple more seconds on collecting that data. And I know we're at 1 minute over, so Again, that's all, folks. Our 30 minutes is up, but don't worry, there's going to be plenty more to come. Again, ensuring that we keep pace, we're going to definitely collect the feedback that we got from today. Love it. Okay. So labor law update, top notch employee engagement. I love these answers, everybody, and thank you so much. The recording of this presentation and the slide deck will be emailed to you in the next coming days. But as always, I'm here to answer any of your HR questions and support your HR needs. Thank you all for joining us for HR in half an hour. And until next time, have a great rest of your week. Cheers, everybody.